What's up, everybody? It's Rath back here with another edition of the Rath Learning Curve series, How to Win DFS College Football. I'm going to hit you off with tip number 10. And tip number 10 is, again, we're talking about news in the preseason. And this involves coaching changes. So big difference here. You know, we have 128 teams in college football. And a lot of times a coaching change means a change in an offensive system. So we're going to talk about some of the coaches that are probably going to have an impact on their teams, and I think you're going to be able to find value in the month of September on the key position players for these teams. These are in no particular order. We'll just run down. I think there's 6 coaching changes that are probably going to be the major ones that we want to pay attention to. First one I have on my list is Tulsa. Philip Montgomery jumps over to Tulsa. Now, he's the offensive coordinator from Baylor. Baylor's had one of the top offensives in college football for several years, kind of starting with the RG3, and even going back a little bit further. But, you know, Baylor's offense has been explosive. You got Philip Montgomery now sliding over to Tulsa. Tulsa does have some talent on the offensive side of the ball. So the quarterback, running back, wide receivers on this team, especially the quarterback and the receivers, you know, a guy like Kevon Lucas, who was already a top 5 wide receiver coming into the season, definitely gets a boost. And you got some second and third wide receivers on that team, especially this kid Garrett, who I think are going to be in position to really do some damage early on. I think you're going to find the pricing to be very affordable on these players. So we're definitely going to keep an eye on Tulsa. Number 2 is SMU. Chad Scott comes over from Clemson. He's offensive coordinator at Clemson. We also know that Clemson's had an explosive offense over the last few years with Deshaun Watson, Taj Board at quarterback. Slew of wide receivers have come out of Clemson, and they still have a bunch more. It's basically becoming wide receiver U at this point. Georgia Tech's put out some good guys, but, man, Clemson is really starting to put out some serious talent at the wide receiver position. So, now it goes over to SMU. Quarterback over there is definitely going to, you know, benefit from this, and also the wide receivers. The wide receivers are going to be cheap coming into the season. So SMU is definitely going to be a team that you're going to want to keep an eye on. With Chad Scott coming into the mix, being the head coach there. Now, the big news about, you know, is who's going to Michigan. That's Jim Harbaugh. Now, I don't expect to really see a ton of fantasy impact with Jim Harbaugh in year one. But from a recruiting standpoint, you know that he's going to bring guys, and he's going to be able to get a lot of kids up there and some top talent. And I would imagine that Jim Harbaugh is going to want to play the pound and ground game when he gets talent in there. I would imagine he's going to want to pound and ground, win with the running game, and win with defense once he gets the talent in there that he wants. So just be in mind, you know, in the future. I still think he's going to want to run the ball a ton this year. So we'll keep an eye on the Michigan running back situation and see how that plays out. Nebraska is interesting. You know, Mike Riley comes over from Oregon State, and so Bo Pelini's out. Now, Nebraska's always been a run-heavy team, and that's now going to change. Now, they don't have Amir Abdullah, who went to the NFL, to the Detroit Lions, but Tommy Armstrong is still there, and now he's going to be thrust into more of a pro-style passing offense, and there's a lot of doubts whether or not he can handle that. So that's really the impact that you're going to see with Mike Riley coming over from Oregon State on Nebraska. Nebraska is probably not going to be the running team that they have been in the past. Florida, one of the worst offenses in college football over the last 3 years. Just dreadful quarterback play over the last few years, mainly by a guy by the name of Jeff Driscoll. But Jim McElwain, who was the head coach at Colorado State, has done really good things there on the offensive side of the football, comes over to the University of Florida, and they've got a lot of young players. So early on, this might not be a team that we want to play on, but during the second half of the season, I think this might be a team, especially if they get off to a slow start and they're not really producing. I think this could be a team where we could find some very cheap value, possibly at the quarterback position and the wide receiver position. I think that there might be an opportunity for the University of Florida to bring some value, and not early on, I think later on in the season once they get adjusted to the new system. And then the other, I think, interesting coaching change is you've got Tom Herman coming over from Ohio State, offensive coordinator at Ohio State, going to Houston. Houston does have some pieces. They have Greg Ward at quarterback, who actually started playing pretty good at the end of last year. So I think that there's going to be some opportunity. Greg Ward is definitely a name that a lot of guys are definitely keeping an eye on in the preseason. So those are going to be the impact of the coaching changes. So what we're looking for is we're looking at position battles like we talked about before with these coaching change impacts, and just seeing, you know, who the wide receivers are going to be on Tulsa, who the wide receivers are going to be on SMU, things along that line. And that's where we're going to be able to find some value early on in college fantasy football. Wrapping up this tip again for today, this is Rath, and join us back here again for another video in the series of how to win DFS college football. Thanks again.